everybody, and welcome back to the Collegiate Hearthstone Training Grounds, day number 2. I'm Nathan Zamora. Joining me again is Kevin Hovdestad. And Kevin, what crazy matches we had yesterday. Some really close nail-biters. I'm looking forward to what we got today.
Yeah, we got some incredible games yesterday. It was a privilege to see just exactly what these guys could bring to the table. In particular, the matches with some of the professional players still playing on collegiate tournaments, just super enjoyable.
Yeah, a lot of players have been getting their start in Tespa. And, yesterday we saw Phone Tap and It's Bolt. And today we got a couple more for you, namely Chess Dude and Dude7597. Lots of dudes.
A lot of dudes.
From the Tespa Training Grounds. If this is your first time joining us, let's talk about the rules for how these guys will be playing. They'll be playing in teams of 3, collaborating with each other that are split into 4 different regions, north, south, east, and west. They'll play one round of the Swiss rounds every single week. To make it to that playoff stage they're aiming for, they're going to need to get at least 4 wins, so a 4-2 or better record. Then from there, they'll advance to that single elimination playoff stage where we'll crown a champion of each region, and they'll go to that live finals to compete for their share of $50,000 in scholarships.
Right, and this week we're actually doubling up. So the teams we're going to be seeing today are the teams with a 5-0 record. A bunch of people who have gone all the way, every match a win, all the way up to this point.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of strong performances we've been having, and now we're starting to finally get to that last portion of the field where we see who's on top. So even though they'll be playing in teams, it is Conquest just as you know it. Each week they'll submit 4 unique classes. From there, they'll select one of their own classes that will not be used for that match. It is a self-ban. From there, they'll play a best of 5 where they'll need to win a game with each of their decks in order to win the set.
So as always in Conquest, once they have a win with any of those classes, they are not able to use it again, and we've seen some very cool things happen because of the self-ban. Teams able to really think differently about how they're going to target their opponent's classes and then take advantage of that targeting.
Yeah, it's been really cool to see. So let's take a look at what we have up for you today. As we said, this was day 2 of this week's play. Yesterday, you can see on the left the matches that took place, but today it's Université Laval taking on Clarkson University, where from there we'll go to Duke University taking on the University of Texas Dallas, and then we'll round up the day with the University of Portland taking on the University of Washington. And as we mentioned, a couple more pros playing on these teams today. Chess Dude, hailing from University of Texas Dallas, was top 8 of the Winter Hearthstone Championship Tour for the Americas, and Dude7597 was there in summer, where he was 2 rounds away from making it to BlizzCon. And that's, like I mentioned yesterday, Phone Tap, who's a strong player with Luminosity Gaming. It's just now, it's not really a surprise to see these guys floating to that 5-0 portion of this event.
No, and all of these teams obviously also, because of their records, advancing to the playoffs. So what we're seeing today is the top teams now just competing for ranking, sorting out whether they're going to get the bye or not going into the regional playoffs.
Yep, seeding definitely important for this. Let's take a look at the East is where we're headed first. And there you can see the standings for yourself. Finally, teams that are not undefeated are on the top portion of the standings. Of course, being this a Swiss pairing, teams are seeded based on their opponent's match win percentage. So the stronger your opponents have been doing, the higher you are if you're tied in record.
Right, and so across the board here, we've got a bunch of 5-0 teams who have had phenomenal matchups, and regardless of their overall win-loss record, how difficult their opponent was really determines where they're at in the bracket right now and who they're playing today.
Right, if you've beaten all your opponents and they've all gone 4-1 at this point, you are likely performing better than the rest of the guys out there. But there you can see it. The first match, again, University of Laval versus Clarkson University. This is another one of those teams that I think you're a little bit excited about, I'd say.
Yeah, maybe just a little bit. It's going to be a fun one to watch for a variety of reasons. And I think, seeing some different classes, some new archetypes being brought up, that's pretty exciting. Yeah,
we look at the lineups here. If last week's decks are always, to me, like a big telling factor of how these guys will play. If you look at University Laval, last week they brought Zoth Hunter, they had Aggro Paladin, Rito Rogue, and Mid-Range Shaman. And this week there's a Priest in their lineup.
Right, so I mean, there's really only one standard deck in that lineup. They haven't brought a lot of things that you would expect to see in a traditional Conquest lineup, let alone at this level.
Right, and if you're excited about this, we want to know about it, and of course we want you to show your school spirit. You can visit us on Facebook, or you can tweet at Team Tespa and share with us your thoughts. If you've got any crazy questions for them too, I'm always an open book. I'm a pretty nice guy. Feel free to tweet at me. Not a big deal. And of course, if you're looking to compete in some TESPA chapters coming up, TESPA's, they've paid out like $1 million in scholarships. We're talking Heroes of the Dorm. The Hearthstone event happened at PAC South earlier this year. There's been a ton of stuff going on. If you're looking to compete, you can visit tespa.org for more information. So now that we've kind of given a little bit of an idea of where we're headed with this match, we talked about, like we said, crazy decks from Laval, and the priest that's in their lineup. I mean, you look at the other side, Clarkson's no exception to this. Last week they brought Mid-Range Shaman, Cthulhu Warrior, Murloc Paladin, and Freeze Mage. Murloc Paladin seems to be like the most popular off-the-wall choice for those.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, I think that's maybe something that is a little bit telling as to how they want to play. They've probably leaned a little bit on the control style. You see that actually really in a lot of lineups in this tournament so far. But I don't know if that's going to pay off for them or not against Laval.
Yeah, it definitely is always a risk when you're playing these strategies. You know, the Priest in Laval's lineup, to me, it really says something about the ability to just have a deck that could be strong in the right situation, and if your opponent doesn't have that lineup, you just self-ban it.
Right, and that could very well be what they're doing, is just trying to bait out the incorrect ban from their opponent because they don't want to have to worry about a Priest matchup for a particular deck.
Definitely something we could look at. Let's take a look at Laval first. They'll be the ones we're looking at here. Dad, I'm scared. Defala and Fred Bone, linguistic, liberal studies, and computer science. I'll tell you what, I'm a little bit scared, but it's not because of his picture. It's because of the linguistics. That's something I'm always just terrified of not having any idea what to actually say.
Definitely the scariest subject on the list, for sure. Although we did talk a lot about how there was lots of variety in how the different teams had come together, and this one, definitely an eclectic collection.
Yeah, I mean, Laval's got 2 teams from the university that are represented in Tespa, and there they are.
Hearthstone pillow and all. This is a good look, and they just look like they're ready to have fun. They're sitting back, relaxing.
Check out this cow on the top right.
Oh,
that was actually the first thing I saw. Was that
just the cow?
It's so far away from them that I'm like, what is that going on over there?
They have called serious attention to it, but there's definitely a lot of Hearthstone merchandise. These guys take it very seriously.
Yeah, and there you can see Clarkson University, Benor, Rashi, and Irby, electrical engineering, computer and software engineering, and mechanical engineering. Kevin, I'm going to go on a limb and say that none of these guys met as a result of engineering.
Probably not. No, it was just a coincidence. They probably all happened to be at the same restaurant at the same time.
Yeah. That's how engineers work, right?
Yeah, they all end up going out for Chinese food, and then suddenly they're all in the same place at the same time.
Yep, and there they are. Same place, the same time. What a coincidence. Can you guys believe it? We were just out getting pad thai, and now here we are. 5-0 in the Tespa Collegiate Hearthstone Championship. I like those guys. Very animated. Those are the kind of guys I feel like I definitely get along with. Like, every single time I meet new people, I always tell a story that's way too long, and then I feel bad for them because it took so much of their time.
Yeah, they definitely look like they're having a really good time. They look excited. And now we've got the bans up on screen there for you. Self-bans on Shaman and Warlock.
Yeah, I mean, the Shaman, we saw it happen yesterday, and it worked out fairly well for them. But the thing we also saw yesterday was a Priest. And it did not work out.
Yeah, the Shaman targeting, I think, has been a big part of the lineup strategy for a lot of teams. But Priest is just such an outside... It was a Dragon Priest yesterday that we saw, and it didn't pan out. There were a lot of unique tech choices in that deck, but I don't know if it's a safe strategy here.
To me, that's kind of what Priest feels like, is just a lot of tech choices.
Right.
And are there decks in the format right now where you need a lot of tech choices to fight against them? To me, I don't think so. And because of that, I feel like it's in a little bit of a weaker spot. But let's hold those tech choices aside for a moment. We have a Netherspite Historian in Bran in a Warrior deck, and meanwhile, we have an Elemental Destruction in Cairn in Clarkson's deck.
Right, so we're definitely looking at what we have to assume is a dragon style of warrior. The Shaman here, I'm not entirely sure, actually. Maybe N'Zoth with the Cairn?
Well, I'm thinking, so here's what I'm thinking. I've been paying close attention to all the deck lists of Yorks. I've been looking for something pretty fun to play. And Hoy, fairly recently, was running a Dragon Warrior almost control style build that had Netherspite Historians in it and said it was performing very well. Clarkson, this just kind of looks like the Bog Champ Shaman deck where you have Ancestral Spirits and lots of strong things up the curve, and you're trying to basically just make multiple of some certain minion depending on the archetype you're playing against. So against Control, for instance, you want multiple Cairns. If you're playing against aggro, you're trying to land it on like Earth Elemental or something. But a much more slow and combo-oriented style of play than what you normally see.
Right, so in this matchup then, we're definitely going to see this one go quite a distance. Do you favor the big swingy reset from N'Zoth in the Shaman, or do you favor the just raw throughput of a Dragon Warrior?
You know, that's a really good question, Kevin, because I don't think I have that great of an experience in this matchup. I think I'm going to sit back and enjoy what's going on.
Nice. All right. Well, I mean, both these players with nice opening hands. They've got good options in front of them. I think you're going to probably see that Netherspite Historian come down here fairly early. And for the Shaman on the other side, I mean, Jeweled Scarab is going to be really nice as a way to set up some subsequent turns down the road. But toteming at this point, I think, is safe if it does maybe tell the other team a little bit less about what they're up against.
That's a big game hunter in Laval's hand.
I haven't seen that card in a long time.
Exactly. Like you are in for seeing some unique cards in this first game. I mean, if you wanted unique decks, you were in the right place at the right time. These guys have already secured their playoff spot. So the only thing that's at risk for them is a seeding placement.
Right. They've already all advanced to the playoffs. We're now at a point where these guys are just maybe experimenting with some new stuff, trying out some ideas that they haven't had an opportunity to try because they're very safe moving forward.
Oh, yeah, Discover Bust on that side. It's Deathwing, Dragonlord, Azure Drake, and Midnight Drake. You know, it's very rare that all three options are reasonable.
Yeah, in this position, the Azure Drake feels pretty good just because there's not going to be a lot of other draw engines in a Dragon Warrior, so it's probably good to have a card that just replaces itself, especially when you don't know a lot about what kind of Shaman you're up against.
Yeah, when you see the hero power on turn 2, you can obviously assume a little bit slower.
Oh, there.
See what's going on. Slow and steady is winning the race. That's what Clarkson says. No reason to jam out the Jeweled Scarab. You know, the game plans to me, it looks like Laval is trying to put together just really strong turns at the end of the game where they have answers to things, but also applying pressure at the same time. A bit of a tempo-oriented game, but not so strong that you're straight muscling people out of games. And for Clarkson, it feels like they're just going to buy time until they find combos.
Right. Neither of these decks are really desperate to get a lot of tempo or be really aggressive. It's very much about getting value and maximizing how much you can get from each individual card. Clarkson, at some point here, does have to start and make a little bit of board commitment. They do want to eventually start and develop some of the cards that they've actually brought with them. So, I mean, to see, for example, the Jeweled Scarab come down here would make a lot of sense, so they have the opportunity to generate something for an upcoming turn. Hero powering every turn all the way up to turn 4 is going to start to feel a little bit awkward.
Wow. Happening again. Again, that's kind of what this deck is about, though. Like, are they really concerned with taking a few points of damage here? And another Hex available that is likely to bring the Hex count to 3 for Clarkson. I mean, for me, it looks like they're not under a ton of pressure, and I think the Netherspite Historian spells some of that. But they got to be careful. If Laval puts together a strong push here, the backup to this is the Elemental Destruction. And so if they're going to Elemental Destruction, it means they have to Lava Shock alongside of it a lot of times to not just completely dump their own turn. So they need to be getting strong value out of that if that's happening. They need to be pulling at least 2 cards to the opponent.
No.
Right, and at this point, we haven't actually seen a lot of minions or threats come out from Laval. So if you're Clarkson in this position, you're thinking about, are we actually at any serious risk in this stage of the game? Do we want to just give ourselves some time and wait until that big board reset is actually going to get us a lot more value? Again, just which team is getting the most value on a turn-to-turn basis is very, very important.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. You know, so far, again, it's just been a slow build, and Laval's starting to mount some pressure. And Clarkson's got to be a little bit careful. You know, if they push something too valuable onto the board, that's a point for Laval. If they don't push it up, does it leave them vulnerable to anything?
Right, their removal strategy does rely somewhat on the addition of, you know, spell damage or being able to hex critical threats. And if they are baited into using a hex too early on or on a target that doesn't matter, that can really change the tempo of this game. They've also just got some very, very valuable tech that you can't afford to, like, they can't tempo out a Harrison Jones against a Warrior. You're going to hold that card for as long as possible to make sure you get real value out of it. And now they may see an opportunity to do just that.
Yep, Bash. Now the Bash and the Netherspite Historian, Clarkson should be paying attention to that because those are non-traditional choices in a Dragon Warrior build. At this point, they should know that something's up. And Laval, it's the same way. They've seen Jeweled Scarab and a lot of totem ups. They have to know that something's going on.
Now, if you're in the position here of Clarkson, do you want to see the additional draw from Harrison, or do you just advance the Cairn and get the better board state?
Honestly, I feel like just from curve considerations, it's got to be Cairn. I mean, this is one of the hardest cards in the deck to actually develop. Right now, being at 27, they're safe from anything pushes. This isn't a card that Laval is going to be fighting back against very often, just because it's very likely to get its value in its own right. So I think the Cairn is really shaping up.
Right, and I guess for Warrior, too, in this position, there's not a lot of clean ways to remove a minion like Cairn. They likely can't silence it, and they don't have any other removal that won't trigger the death rattle. So Clarkson knows they're in a position to get both bodies out of Cairn, and that's important, and does still allow them to Harrison on a follow-up turn if there's another weapon in play.
Yep. Everything's coming up Cairn. For Laval, It's certainly a cause for concern.
Yeah, they definitely, it feels like they've got an opportunity here to just sort of take their time. There's no reason to rush the board with a lot of important cards. Removing Cairn is important, but they don't want to do so in a way that's really, really resource expensive. They've got lots of good cards and lots of time. They're not threatened by this Cairn in any way.
Yeah, notice this is the longest turn they've had before they've taken an action. That Cairn has kind of solidified the idea to them of what this is. They know that it's very likely to be Ancestral Spirits and Elemental Destruction and the like in this build. And I think it's what's kind of slowing down their pace a little bit here, is trying to fight against Cairn in an effective manner without giving away too much of the board.
Yeah, it's definitely a consideration when you see the Cairn come down. That is not in any way a traditional Shaman card. You don't see that in the vast majority of Shaman builds. So now, as Laval, they have to stop and think about what that means in terms of, valuing, for example, the Blackwing Corruptor as removal. And on Clarkson's side, Curator is an interesting inclusion. I actually really like this, but now we're going to see an opportunity with that spell power for Maelstrom Portal to represent a lot of removal in one turn.
Ooh, that's a nice, not a bad drop either. With the Pit Snake here.
Yeah, Pit Snake going to be probably not a huge issue because there's going to be lots of ways for Laval to get rid of that, although it may actually bait out the Bookworm.
That's what I'm looking at, is not so much that the Pit Snake is going to do something really strong on board, but that it's kind of forcing the hand from Laval in this spot. Normally they looked at this, they had Blackwing Corruptor on the Bane Bloodhoof and have a 5-4 contesting versus the Azure Drake. In this spot, suddenly there's a Pit Snake, and they have a bit of a cause for concern here. It's very rare that the one drop from Maelstrom Portal can be quite so impactful, but anytime you force an action for your opponent, that's usually pretty good.
And it's just difficult, right? Because now at this point, with the style of deck that Clarkson is running, this Shaman deck is probably not going to have a lot of targets for Bookworm. There's not going to be a lot of things that you can actually remove using the Bookworm. So it's probably more efficient to do that than use the Battlecry from the Blackwing Corruptor. But again, you just have to value these things very carefully and decide how you're going to get efficient trades, which right now, no matter how they do it, Laval is going to be in a bit of a tricky position.
Yeah, mana considerations are definitely a big deal. If they use Bookworm now, do they have a strong Blackwing Corruptor target next turn? If they spend too many dragons, do they find themselves having a Blackwing Corruptor before they play a dragon? It's little tiny things like that that make all the difference. And Shield Slam is going to be the first slated option.
Okay, so that's a slightly more complicated turn than we envisioned, but does leave Laval in an okay position. They're not losing anything really of consequence to the Pit Snake in an Alex Strazos champion. And Clarkson on the other side, outside of being able to play the Curator, really can't develop much of a scary board this turn.
Yeah, this is kind of a cool turn from Laval, where they're trying to use what seems to be their weaker tools in their hand to answer the board state, which I think they did very well. And suddenly, this Pit Snake's under a bit of a threat. So Clarkson not getting tremendous value out of things and kind of almost being forced on the trade here. I think this is really good from Laval.
Yeah, I mean, it does leave them with lots of options, and they haven't expended any of the critical resources to be activators for their other dragons, right? With only 2 dragons in hand, they have to think very carefully about how they spend them, because if they play the Azure Drake to cycle at this point, they're left in a position where they cannot activate the Bookworm if they don't draw into another dragon.
Ah, that's why the Curator's in there. It picks up Jeweled Scarab.
That's actually a really smart play here from Clarkson. Allows them to really have lots of tools available, and Jeweled Scarab just such an easy way to generate additional value. They're not worried at all about the pace of this game at this point with Healing Wave in hand, Elemental Destruction, 2 if not 3 hexes. This is very, very favorable, I think, for Clarkson right now.
And that's exactly when the tank up hits. I'm a bit worried. Every time someone starts taking up, I fear for their opponent.
Yeah, tank up represents just so much gain turn on turn, and in Clarkson's deck right now, there's no obvious path to victory. There's no toolkit that we can see developed up to this point that wins them the game. They can certainly take control, they can rebuild the board, but there's no obvious win condition at this point. And Spirit Claw is an enormously valuable pickup here. That's a clean way to deal with Justicar. They do have the Healing Wave in hand, so taking that little bit of damage, not a huge threat going into turn 9.
Gosh, I get they're saving the Lava Shot because they want to couple it with Overload effects, but 6 damage is a lot to take.
Yeah, it's expensive, but Dragon Warrior probably not going to clear their board really, really fast. And again, looking at Laval's hand, what are they supposed to do here? I mean, the best outcome they have right now, unless they get lucky on the pickup from the Azure Drake, is killing the Healing Stream Totem.
I mean, Bookworm definitely is starting to become stranded in hand. There's really not much question about that one. I do like the Azure Drake. Try to dig for some gas. Baron Geddon even.
Yeah, Geddon really great traditionally as anti-shaman tech, but in this position, it's not going to do a whole lot.
Trying to debate the merits of coining a 5-drop or tank up, and they have elected tank up. So Clarkson just saw a weak turn from Laval. Is this the turn they start getting aggressive themselves?
I mean, I think they have to start thinking about how they push damage, because they've got to get through the armor, and it's not just the armor that is in play right now, but the additional 4 armor on every subsequent turn. Ooh, that's a difficult decision to make here. Wow.
This is funny.
They're gonna have so much removal, but so little actual. Like, maybe you take the Silithid Swarmer just to have the ability to push some damage.
Well, you gotta be able to push with Spirit Claws first. So, I don't know. I think I like the. I think I like one of the AOE spells, and I'd probably go with Elemental Destruction this spot because at this point you've scaled into the end game. If this game turns into a big grind, are you going to need a 10-mana turn followed by a 10-mana turn? Not necessarily sure. Lightning Storm certainly presents some damage value, but Elemental Destruction is presenting like a full removal spell. Think about it, it's touching your own board as well.
Right, and they do need to get something out of hand here because they are at hand cap, so I think they're going to be forced to play this Healing Wave. Otherwise, they are actually not going to be able to draw cards, and oh, wow.
That's a good one to see.
That's some pretty good information to have.
If you're going to lose a brawl, that's a nice way to lose it. Or a joust, rather, not a brawl.
Yeah, it tells them a great deal about their opponent's deck. Clarkson now knows they're on a bit of a special clock as this game develops.
So 1 Hex is in reserve for Big Papa Deathwing.
And Laval now, again, just sort of doesn't have great options. I think the Blackwing Corruptor to clear the Curator is a likely outcome here, but they may want to do some fishing with this Netherspite Historian first and see what they get for additional options.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at Bookworm here. I think that getting a couple large threats on board could definitely be worth it, but they've shown last turn they are very, very concerned about tanking up a lot. So I think you're right. I think Netherspite Historian with the Blackwing Corruptor is much more on their radar.
And Twilight Guardian is a really good pickup here. They don't really need more aggression at this point. They, I think, win the value war over the long game with tank up in play so early. So they're going to take their time now and just try to continue to get, you know, reasonable trades on the board, but make sure they hit that tank up basically every turn.
That can't cost you, though. Sometimes development is worth a lot.
Well, and now we've seen exactly what the long-term strategy is here coming out from Clarkson. They do have enough spell damage that Lightning Storm represents a full board clear now. And they can start to actually do a lot of damage if Laval doesn't get a way to contest this board. And for better or for worse, I think the Baron Geddon may have to come out just as a way to deal with some of the totems as potential threats, because there isn't a reason that Clarkson couldn't be running Bloodlust in this deck.
I like the Geddon.
The Geddon is good here.
Yeah.
The Geddon is a smart play. It's probably dead to any number of things next turn. Although, how it gets removed will tell you a lot about Clarkson's long-term strategy as well. Do they use the Maelstrom Portal and the Weapon Charge? Do they choose to Hex it because they've got 3 to use? Do they spend an additional AoE spell? That's all technically playable. I think they're probably going to try to preserve board state. They don't necessarily want to give away the spell damage from the Azure Drake.
Maelstrom Portal seems like one of the stronger starts to me. It's obviously one of the tougher cards, I'd say, in this matchup to use. You're setting up the kill for the Baron Geddon. That's what I think they're trying to figure out right now is just order of operations here to kill this. I mean, at this point, you probably could even use Lava Shock.
If they have to, they certainly can. And I think they have enough obvious ways to get health back in hand with both the second Healing Wave and Halazeal that they can afford to take the face damage if they choose to use the second charge of Spirit Claws as well.
Yep, they were going for the spell damage there. And they will expend the other Lightning Storm. So 1 Lightning Storm was from Jeweled Scarab.
Tournament attendee, an interesting pickup here. I don't know if that represents a meaningful threat, although Laval in their deck, because they need so much Dragon Synergy, likely not necessarily room for Ravaging Ghoul in their build.
It's definitely possible. I mean, the build has clearly been on the heavier side of things, so they're going to have some sort of early game to shore that up. But, I mean, now that you mentioned, we really haven't seen that many 3. We've seen Fierce Monkey, and that's it.
Fierce Monkey and a Bash on 3 is all we've seen
Fierce Monkey,
up to this
Bash,
point.
Fiery War X.
Yeah.
Everything else has been... Oh, obviously Alex Shaw's champion and Nether Spike Historian. I'm just talking about in the 3 slots specifically.
Yeah, it's really only been those 2 cards. I would not be surprised if they decided that the only reason to run Ravaging Ghoul in this style of build would be probably as an Execute activator. And
we haven't seen Execute.
We haven't seen Execute either. So they may just be going for a very heavy minion style here. I don't think they can afford to Deathwing with all the resources they have in hand, so they're probably going to look at... Yeah, I like the Curator here just for the taunt. And it picks up the Monkey as well as the Azure Drake. So that's a really nice, clean turn for them and does give them some additional resources going into the upcoming turns.
The fact that Clarkson doesn't have a strong burst plan has become very apparent to Laval. And as a result, they are playing a very slow, grindy game where, what does Laval have to worry about? They're just tanking up every turn, getting a card from Clarkson every single turn, getting more and more information about the hand texture. Everything is coming up Laval for me right now because Clarkson has utility that's meant to swing board positions. Laval isn't building a board position, they're answering one.
I mean, the only thing that I can think of for Clarkson is that they do know about the Deathwing. And that really changes the calculus for me a lot, because when they know that Deathwing is in play, they can start to reevaluate a little bit. How is it that we're going to actually close a game out? Because we can't just win on board position. And we saw the Karen get killed without any Ancestral Spirits coming into play. We haven't seen a lot of other Death Rattle minions hit the board, on the presumption that maybe, like with Chilmaw showing up here, I think we're pretty confident that N'Zoth is buried somewhere at the bottom of his deck. So they are going to have to hold N'Zoth to reset the board after Deathwing, but they're not actually going to be in a winning game position up until basically the N'Zoth comes down.
Yeah, to me that boils down to Sylvanas. If Sylvanas is in the build and that's in play, Deathwing is not getting played. So that's kind of the kicker to that, is if you're going to N'Zoth aggressively versus this build, you probably want Sylvanas to come into play from the N'Zoth as well.
Right, and we've got to be getting close here to the tail end of Clarkson's deck. We've seen almost all of the meaningful healing, AoE, and removal spells. So they're going to be in a position pretty quick here where, yeah, 9 cards left at this point. They're going to need Sylvanas to come up really soon if that's going to actually be a part of their late game strategy. Interesting to me that they're still holding back so much of the removal and also that second healing wave. The second healing wave has been in hand for a long time and feels like a very natural way to get maximum value off this last charge of Spirit Claws.
Yeah, I'm curious. Sometimes you can forego launching the healing wave if you anticipate a big Halazeel turn coming up. So that could be something they're thinking about. You know, say they use the healing wave, opponent extends to the board, and then you have to use Halazeel with Elemental Destruction and clear. You lose a lot of the effect of Halazeel potentially because it's a lot less flexible than the healing wave is. So that could be something they're thinking about as well. For Laval, this is the time where you got to start thinking about fatigue. Right now, shield block, if this goes to a fatigue war, represents a lot of damage on yourself over the course of 5 or 6 turns of that.
Yeah, and you also, I mean, are aware of the healing wave, and you don't want to take too many resources out of your deck and allow your opponent to guarantee that they're going to get full value off of a healing wave. Because if there's no minion in the opposing deck, if Laval has nothing left to draw, then Clarkson will win the healing wave joust by default.
Yep. Checking to see if there's a dragon behind the Chilmaw. Of course, if there's no dragon in hand, 3 damage does not get dealt to the board. So some resources invested there for Laval that end up with this board state. Now what?
Right, and that's going to be a very interesting question for Laval, because with no activator for Chilmaw, you become even more concerned about the N'Zoth follow-up. If N'Zoth comes down late in the game and brings all these Death Rattle minions back, that's where the game falls apart for Laval if they don't have a combination of removal opportunities left.
Yep, you are not seeing things. That is the 3rd Twilight Guardian. That was from another Historian. That is the 3rd Lightning Storm. One was which was from a Jeweled Scarab. So, welcome to the Collegiate Trading Grounds.
Collegiate Training Grounds has done some crazy stuff here. Clarkson's going to hold on to everything, and They're actually, interestingly enough, they've left themselves in a position where they may not be able to play Harrison for the same reason that you were talking about with the shield block. You may not be able to afford to take the extra draw.
I actually remember back to the 2014 World Championships where Teray was playing Shaman versus Priest, and back then Shaman was almost a pure control deck. Well, Shaman did not operate very well versus Priest. In fact, it was thought to be such a bad matchup, it was almost in the vein of that Warrior versus Freeze Mage feel. Teray held on to a Doomhammer right until it started getting to that fatigue spot. Harrison was in the Priest's hand, and they eventually needed a 5/4 threat. Teray then dropped Doomhammer, doesn't swing with it, and Harrison couldn't come down because they were just dead. So he ended up killing a Harrison without taking damage with a Doomhammer.
Protecting himself from the fatigue because of the Doomhammer.
And he won the game because of that play.
That is some next level Harrison play. I don't think we're going to see quite that out of Laval because there's no 8 durability weapons in Warrior, but it certainly asks some interesting questions. I mean, Clarkson's hand is full, and they really need to put something on the board here because now they're in that position where, unless they actually start to develop the board, I mean, they've got no Lava Shock left. They've already expended the Lava Shock, so they can't reset the big Overload turn. And they are still very aware of that Deathwing. Everything they've done says, how do we avoid overplaying into Deathwing?
Alazeal, Elemental Destruction it is.
It's going to be a nice big heal, not going to clear the board, and Alazeal is going to be out of play here now very quickly this next turn.
Yeah, this is definitely a priority kill for the most part.
Just incredible here that Laval up to now 15 armor, and they're going to continue to add to that total every turn. They can afford to use the Fiery War Axe as removal because they've just got such a huge health total, and there's no burst potential from the Shaman.
Yep, and so in this spot, Laval, it looks like they're going to play Azure Drake as well. And this is in that same market I was just talking about. Drawing cards can be a liability at this point. And we'll see where this goes. I don't know, it just feels like a brand to me.
Feels like a brand. Too bad here for Clarkson now. No Lava Shock means Sylvanas can't come out, and that would have been a huge play now that they've gotten Azoth in hand. That's one of the most important parts of this entire package, is having that Sylvanas come down as early as possible. And unfortunately, they're also, again, forced to really consider the fatigue math in whether or not they're willing to play this Harrison.
Yeah, so the Sylvanas in hand right now, super important. Karen Bloodhoof is the only Death Rattle that's gone at this point.
Chilma also left.
Oh, Chilma was... Did I miss Chilma? I didn't know Chilma, thank you. So there is two. So Chilma is the other one. But again, the big part about it is if N'Zoth comes down into Deathwing, that's a way to lose your attack plan. If Sylvanas comes out from the N'Zoth as well, Laval can no longer play Deathwing at that point. That's the super important part of that. So Clarkson drawing the Sylvanas, even though it's super late, this may give them a chance to start getting a little bit aggressive.
Right, and we know now that Laval doesn't have a lot of ways to do anything for minion removal. Basically, at this point, they're limited to stealing something with their own Sylvanas if it comes down. So Clarkson, I mean, they may or may not be anticipating a Sylvanas from their opponent, but they've got to think very carefully about how they start and protect their life total, because they've only got the one reset left in Healing Wave. They've used the first one, Halazeel's no longer in play. If they start and lose, you know, even just the 7 power on the board in health every turn, they're going to be in a lot of trouble when the fatigue kicks in.
That belongs in a museum.
Fiery War Axe belongs in a museum. Draws them a Stormcrack. Now that's a really huge pickup right now to be able to get this Azure Drake off the board.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly was a good... I was looking towards Elemental Destruction, Sylvanas' turn. Get this Sylvanas developed, let it die. That's what N'Zoth's for. And Clarkson is... They're thinking about a different game plan. And, you know, at this point, is there a way to read no execute in Laval's hand? I think for all intents and purposes, Clarkson believes that executes in this build. They've already seen Shield Slam. It's a Warrior build. How often is a Warrior build tanking up and they don't include executes?
Right, and interesting to note as well now that Laval has drawn the Brawl. So if you're Laval now, you have this massive opportunity to deal with the big N'Zoth turn that doesn't involve the Deathwing. So they can maybe choose to play Deathwing a little bit more aggressively and not be quite so afraid of what happens as an outcome.
I'm almost out of cards.
And that's a horrifying thought to hear at this point.
I mean, Laval wins the Fatigue War if they're able to stabilize here, but their best case scenario here is probably...
Ooh, that shield slam is a huge draw, actually.
Right, they can use their Sylvanas to steal Clarkson's Sylvanas.
And that honestly, that's the biggest blow to Clarkson here, because if the Sylvanas get stolen, it means N'Zoth is not resurrecting. Not so much that Laval has a Sylvanas, but that Clarkson doesn't.
Right, and that changes the value on N'Zoth pretty substantially. So they're going to be in a position now where they have to figure out how to react to this. I think the reaction from Clarkson there tells you a lot about how they're feeling about the state of affairs right now.
Yeah, this is ugly.
They have to hex the Sylvanas from Laval if they don't elemental destruction it. Like, they can't leave it in play.
Well, at this point, their win condition, I think, just went flying out the window. And granted, the brawl, we can see that the brawl is there, but from their perspective, they're seeing that happen. They're like, oh, we know he has Deathwing. We know he's got this massive armor total.
Right. How do
they should have given the Blood Mage over to Laval. The Blood Mage draws a card. Or
I mean,
can't
had the Blood Mage been in play, it just died to that elemental destruction.
So now, and that's what I'm saying, like the fact that, I don't know why I phrased it the way I did, but the fact that the elemental destruction rolled low on that is super important.
Yeah, giving away that Thalmos is a critical error in the late game strategy here. Clarkson's basically stuck now. They're not going to get much back from their N'Zoth. There's several ways for Laval to answer that.
Second brawl is the other threat. I mean, I'm a little bit concerned for Laval. I mean, they're like 3 cards ahead of Fatigue. That is a ton of damage.
But Laval is so far ahead on the Fatigue map, and that's an amazing brawl outcome for them.
I mean, this is a lot of damage they're going to be taking from Fatigue. I don't know if you've ever used one of those Fatigue calculators. Have you ever come across these?
Yeah.
So in a Warrior matchup, when both players are reaching like 30, 40 armor totals, being a card ahead in Fatigue literally represents like 17 damage. And in this spot, they are 3 cards ahead. Now, Clarkson isn't going to have the same amount of time as that, but they do have Healing Wave in the build. So if they end up taking some damage and get off a full Healing Wave, I haven't done the math outside of my head. I always just Google that calculator and use it, but Laval can lose this game.
Right. I mean, their biggest problem at this point is that they can't play this Deathwing until they're 100% sure that there's no way for Clarkson to get back on the board. And if they do just die to Fatigue as they are unable to develop any threats. Because at minimum, Clarkson can throw down, even just the simple Searing Totem, and they do have the second Healing Wave left. Laval has to be aware of that.
This is tough. Not gonna lie. Laval is starting to get a much more aggressive team. You notice that they've seen elemental destructions at this point. They've seen lightning storms at this point. They know that there's no clear left, and this is their turn to really kick up the heat.
Justicar in Shaman. That is incredible.
So that Healing Wave represents 7 points of life right now. So they didn't really lose that much. And Clarkson, I think, has started to get the read that there are no executes in this build. They've seen 2 shield slams. They haven't seen any Ravaging Ghouls. They know that one of those cards is Deathwing. Right now, the mystery cards are far left and far right. If they saw 1 brawl, they may be able to conclude that there's a second brawl. But that big game hunter is totally concealed. But Clarkson is concluding that it's not execute here.
Right, they're playing as if there is no execute, and Laval has to think very carefully. I mean, they can throw away their entire board here to clear Chillmaw. And if they do that, they've got no threats of their own to develop. Either way, regardless of outcome, if they play Brawl or Deathwing, there's still going to be a Bane Bloodhoof in play.
Not only that, but Clarkson's got an Elise in hand, which gives them a foregoing a card in Fatigue. And so Laval has recognized that they're behind. They have to win the Brawl if they're going to win the game.
And they do not win the Brawl. That's a critical turn.
There's the Blood Mage tick, and that's going to do it. Laval can no longer win the game.
Yeah, for better or for worse, they simply do not have the resources. There's still 3 hexes in hand for Clarkson. They don't have to worry at all here. I mean, they just push damage and win the Fatigue War.
They don't even need a totem. Just play Elise. Save the totems for the Justicar. Always make 1/1s.
Looks like they may, though, just choose to get the totem and Justicar developed here.
Pick which totem you want. It's like my regular opponent on ladder. Ah!
Yeah, and now, I mean, Laval, they have to play the Deathwing. They know it's getting hexed, and they just have to wait and see what the remaining threats are. Elise alone is basically going to decide this game. Big Game Hunter has no natural targets.
You know what really decided this game was the liberal amount of card draw these players were going for. The shield block, playing the Azure Drakes instead of holding them in hand as Dragon Activators.
They even took an Azure Drake off with another Spike Historian, so they just had a lot of additional cycle, and there's not going to be enough fatigue. It's not going to fatigue fast enough here for Laval to beat Clarkson. Even if they didn't have the healing wave in hand, they're going to lose this game simply because of this Elise coming down. And Laval is, at this point, recognizing that they have no way back into this game.
I think they lose the fatigue even without the Elise. I want to say they do.
With tank up in play, I don't think that would be the case, because at this point they're only taking 1 and 2 damage per turn.
Well, they just took 5. Yeah, I see what you're saying. I don't know. I don't know how the math works out. Because how many turns does it take them to roll the 1-1 at least? It's a close call.
But I mean, Laval with no threats left, they're going to see the math working out no matter what here.
Yeah.
The healing wave is just icing on the cake at this point.
Healing wave, Gold Monkey. Begin combat. How often do you see 2 hexes in a monkey matchup?
Pretty okay pickups from the monkey here as well. So Laval definitely a valiant effort in game 1, but it is in fact going to be Clarkson winning with their Control Nizoth Shaman over the Dragon Warrior in the first game.
Just in case you hadn't been killed by that card enough. There's Leroy Jenkins. God bless. They're not playing Malkarok here because they want to avoid Curse Blade potentially being a disaster for them.
Yeah, Curse Blade could actually make the fatigue math really, really scary. Leroy Jenkins might have been a safe play, but they just didn't need to.
Yep. Got the game locked up. A grindy one, but Clarkson very decisive after that. And that's one of the trickier matchups, I think, and something you can look at and get a good idea of how tough it is to play some of these late game matchups. You know, you think about card games, who doesn't want to draw cards? That sounds great, but when you're coming down to these battles that you know are going to be who has the last threat, drawing cards can be a liability, and that's something you have to identify outside of the game, because that can start as early as turn 1. You can decide that there's no way you want to draw cards and literally sit back and wait.
Well, and think too about the information that Clarkson got off of the jousts. Knowing that Deathwing was in play absolutely changed how they approached that game. They had to do a lot of math around removal potential, but when you know that your opponent has Deathwing coming down, that changes how you value your hexes, it changes how you plan on committing to the board, and they were able to navigate that much more successfully, knowing exactly what major removal was going to be in play.
Yep, 1-0 now, and I can tell you what, with that dragon build coming from the Warrior, I think I have a good idea of where this Priest is headed, personally. We'll have to see, but Clarkson, with that Shaman build, there is no telling what their other two are.
Oh, I mean, it's hard to say. Like, we know that they're bringing Mage and Warrior, but it could be any number of surprises. I mean, Mage is a class that we've seen a lot of variety from just in recent memory. There's lots of variations on Tempo Mage, on Freeze Mage. You can do a great deal of different things with the class, and your strategy can vary. You can choose to go for more direct burn versus more board presence. There's a lot of ways they could do this.
Also, some of those Grinder Mage builds that have been coming up. We actually, when we had Strife Crow, or Kong Shu, come to the cast, somebody had played, one of the teams had played his list that he made in the event, and then afterwards thanked him for the list because it performed so well for them.
Wow, well, okay, so you are going to see some interesting things here as well. Laval going to their Hunter, and that's an Argent Squire and a Cat Trick showing up, so I think you have a pretty good idea this is going to be a fast, secret-based Hunter deck already.
Yeah, I am a little bit curious about the Argent Squire. Oftentimes with sort of the new Face Hunter builds that we've been seeing, Secret Keeper is the one drop you rely on. And outside of that, the 1-cost cards are tracking. Argent Squire being in here, curious to see what the rest of the build is. It's very clear to me that they want to hold board control in some sense. Could that be a hybrid build?
It very well could. I mean, you typically want Secret Keeper, both because it allows you to snowball a little bit if you're able to get down an early Cloaked Huntress or follow it up immediately with a Secret. It also can be really good as a way to deter your opponent from using those cards if you end up drawing the Mirror Match or drawing into, for example, a Freeze Mage. You don't want to give your opponent additional value on their Secret Keeper because it is affected by all secrets played. Unleash the Hounds, not actually a super common play in Hunter right now either, so this is an interesting looking build already.
Protects me. Hello, one.
Hello.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, Clarkson didn't get the start they wanted here, but You were right already about this not maybe being the standard warrior build, because that is definitely an infested Tauren.
Yeah, another N'Zoth build for Clarkson so far. If they're running the triple threat of N'Zoth, I'll be impressed.
That would be truly impressive if they had gone all in on N'Zoth.
Val's hand is awful.
Yeah, this is not the start they wanted to see. Cat Trick is nice, but it doesn't actually do a lot for them against Warrior in particular.
It does sit around for a while. You know, in any time that Clarkson wants to coin, now that's something they actually may get caught on, where they're like, they just may forget about Cat Trick. It's the one that I probably forget about more than just anything else.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to test for everything, right? They're going to test for snipe. Next up, they'll be testing for some combination of explosive or freezing if the Ravaging Ghoul is still on the board. There's a lot of questions here that secret asks, and all they've eliminated at this point is it's probably not snipe.
Yeah, it's definitely not snipe. That's the one they know. And steady shots abound for Laval. With this kind of hand, honestly, I really like this from Laval too. They're going to need to make up the fact that this hand is so weak somewhere along the lines. And the fact that they have gotten hero power for hero power for hero power and foregone development, you know, they're making the most of their situation. And that's just Hearthstone in general. You have to make the most of tough situations. Yeah,
and Laval is going to feel really really awkward here now that the Cloaked Huntress is gone, which does tell Clarkson that this wasn't a freezing trap. So they can get away with putting down minions and developing a board that, frankly, Laval just can't answer right now.
Do you have the artifact?
I think the last one is explosive trap. It's the last thing they want to check. When they find out it's not explosive trap, they are free to manipulate the Cat Trick however they see fit.
I mean, it may just very well not come into play. There's so little in the way of spells in Warrior to begin with, let alone N'Zoth Warrior. The only threat, really, that Clarkson is worried about right now is just how many aggressive hits they're taking because of the charge minions, because of steady shot. They got to start to think, actually, probably about how do they start and add some hero power weaving into their strategy here so that they don't just continue to slowly bleed out to steady shot.
Yeah, it's probably Justicar. His next turn is at 1. I mean, coin Justicar here would have normally been great. The fact that they didn't coin Justicar here tells me that Clarkson knows that it's Cat Trick. And a couple things to note right now. Those 3 left cards, they're seeing Unleash the Hounds right now. The other 2 have yet to be played. So they're not Savannah Highmane. That would have been dropped this turn. It's not Stranglethorn Tiger. That would have been dropped last turn. What are they? And if they're nothing, it means it's in the neighborhood of Explosive Trap, or Unleash the Hounds, or Cat Trick. And so Clarkson's got to feel super comfortable here because they know the burst from Laval is super low.
Right, and if it is an explosive trap, that's not a huge threat to Clarkson's game plan right now because they're going to just keep trading to clear the board. And I think you were right about Justicar before, but with Bash in hand now, I think they might have to reconsider. Bash might be the right combination of both removal and getting some armor and life total back.
I'll be curious to see how they play this because to me, Revenge is totally a reasonable play. But man, getting Justicar down is going to be so good. It's almost impossible for them to die next turn if they just clear the beast off.
Looks like they're actually eyeballing the Revenge as removal, which is an interesting choice. They did test for the explosive. They now know that's not in play.
Right, and so now they know it's Cat Trick, and there's no reason to play a spell. So to me, this spell's Justicar now.
Do they risk dying though if they play?
Revenge pulls 1 power off the board. This activates Cat Trick.
I'm just trying to think about what they're playing around here in terms of threats because at this point in the game, they're actually dead to a double kill command.
It's got to be a top deck kill command, but the possibility's there. And when you see the trap that fast, you know very well that's another Cat Trick.
Yeah. Going to be very difficult here for Clarkson actually to stabilize because there's a lot of damage, and the second weapon charge is very, very critical, but I don't think they can afford the resources to play Harrison and remove it. Shield Block and Bash, both very, very powerful cards on this turn. Bash will take care of the existing Cat. It does activate the new one, but that and Shield Block might be the best way for them to survive.
2 cards in hand, so they know. That's really interesting. Ah, they're trying to draw the extra card from Harrison. Okay.
That belongs in a museum.
Okay, that makes sense. I like that.
That actually works out really well. And
that can clear 8 damage off the board. It'll clear the concealed 4. That's probably, I don't know. Maybe that's not enough.
they're still dead to the Unleash Kill Command hero power. I think they need to actually play this shield block. If they revenge, I think they die.
Oh my. Clarkson is dead to the Unleash the Hounds Kill Command hero power. They played this game so conservatively. Oh, wow.
And a top deck Leroy just to round out the options.
So that for the man who has everything.
Incredible.
And they're not going to show it, but Clarkson played this game really conservatively in the middle of the game. That Justicar should have been slammed on 6. They were totally safe. They take that damage, and then they just expend their removal spells and hit the tank up button. That's how Hunter loses.
Yeah,
There's no coming back from that.
It felt to me like they continually in that game failed to recognize the value of the armor on a turn-to-turn basis. Whether it was after playing Justicar or just from the bash and the shield block, they had other outs that would have allowed them to stabilize their health total, but the expenditure of that revenge basically meant that they had no way to actually defend themselves, and I don't think they did the math around what can possibly do 7 damage on 8 mana from Hunter in a Hunter deck where you've seen, you've seen the charge minions, you've seen the hero power being used every turn. They hadn't seen a kill command, but it wasn't unreasonable to think that that was very much almost a face hunter in play.
Quick shot as well.
Quick
I
shot,
mean, the
absolutely.
two cards in hand could have. It's a little bit hard for I think the left one to be something really strong. Unleash the Hounds really fits the bill for that. I'm thinking maybe there's a chance to like Call of the Wild because it's been stuck there for so long, but the Ardent Squires and the Chargers may give that a different feel alongside the Cat Trick. The important thing I think to look at here is really that Laval just made sure they hero powered every single turn, and that extra damage that they accumulated, and not just wasting Unleash the Hounds to be like, well, it's not very good in this matchup, let's try to take a couple points damage. They invested into that, and it led to that board state at the end where they had an opportunity.
Right, and there were so many card combinations. I mean, even getting lucky on an animal companion and a weapon, like that could have been sufficient, and there's an unlikely possibility that that first card was a weapon, but you play around those possibilities. You play around the only outs that are left for your opponent. Having played that shield block, there was almost no combination of cards that could have killed them on that last turn.
It's just tough to call. I think just not respecting the armor, like you said, is the big one. Personally, me, jamming that Justicar down.
Yeah, Justicar would have felt really, really good.
Welcome to the Grand Tournament, indeed. Tank up. Hitting that button is just so satisfying.
Yeah, it's definitely a type of just satisfaction you don't get from any other class after playing Justicar.
Yep, Dragon Priest for Laval.
We didn't see this do so well yesterday.
No,
Dragon
we did
Priest
not.
did not pan out the way it was expected to. But we also very rarely saw Mulligan this good in that Priest deck.
Yeah, the game that it won, it did go 1-2, I believe. It definitely had some strong game, but I think it was the first game it played, it missed turn 4. And missing turn 4 snowballed the game. There was almost 0% chance after that.
Yeah, it's so critical in Dragon Priest because you're basically relying entirely on having really good on-curve plays. You need to develop the board almost every turn in the early game.
Yeah, some sort of impact needs to be made in the board state.
Luckily for Laval here, they did get most of the tools necessary to make that happen. They've got almost the optimal set of on-curve plays here for a Dragon Priest.
Yep, Twilight Whelp is going to be met by this Fiery War Axe, so things already starting a little bit rough for Laval. Now, this matchup's not totally unwinnable. Like, normally, the Dragon builds, if they get checked for a little while, they're kind of dead in the water, but Dragon Priest is going to have a very different top end than, say, Dragon, like a standard Dragon Warrior deck, not necessarily the Dragon Warrior deck that Laval has brought.
Right, and I mean, this is going to be very difficult because Clarkson can't plan around having the right removal tools in hand every turn. If they choose to play the Ravaging Ghoul here, they do get rid of the Wormrest Agent, but every turn, something comes down that's bigger and stronger from Laval. Like, these have been expensive removal turns for Clarkson, and they took damage each turn. If Laval, for example, develops the Twilight Guardian right now, what possible way, other than wasting a very expensive premium removal card, does Clarkson have to continue to trade?
Yeah, it's a good question.
I think they're just they're evaluating the question of, is it worth using the coin when we don't necessarily have a good follow-up turn 4, but I don't think it's worth passing on this turn and not getting that Twilight Guardian into play.
It's hard to pass turns, it really is. I mean, at this point, they may just be looking at it and thinking, what can we draw that makes an impact? Nether Spite Historian, another Wormrest Agent. I mean, you have quite a few draws in the build that can do something on turn 4.
I wonder.
So the coin here, when they choose not to coin, they would rather have a turn 4 play and have nothing now than have a turn 3 play and have nothing on the next turn. I personally am going for the something now because every single one of the draws that enables your turn 4 is going to give you that super strong hand you're looking for.
Right, and if they hold it back because they're thinking about, for example, coining out the Blackwing Corruptor next turn, they end up with an awkward turn 4. They get that coined out turn 5, but they may end up with an awkward turn 5 to follow. This is the best possible way to try and maximize curve value for them. Well, early Justicar, one of the most probable threats to the Dragon Priest over the long term, because Dragon Priest is also just one of those decks that can't burst through large volumes of armor as the game goes on.
Yep, Clarkson slated for the trade here, so 2 cost card would be totally fine, and so is a Twilight Whelp. Twilight Whelp often, I think, can be held in this spot just to be the main dragon activator. It is by far the weakest dragon in the build, and so if they don't play Twilight Whelp here, it means that their Bookworms are always going to be active, it means that Blackwing Corruptor is always going to be active. Any of those future dragon cards would stick around. Here, they're investing in it, and it's going to keep chipping away at the armor a bit.
Right, and it may be that the presence of the Nether Spite Historians later in the deck, because we did see one in the Mulligan phase, means that they've got something planned long-term as a way to continue to have a dragon activator down the road. That can be the ability for them to pull a late-game dragon that does stay in hand for quite a while.
Yeah, but they hold on to the Blackwing Corruptor here, which is really smart. Clarkson's heading into turn 6, where oftentimes they will drop Justicar. They already have an answer waiting in the wings.
And I mean, if you're Clarkson, even if you know that that's a strong probability, I think you still try and get Justicar down as early as possible in this matchup.
This is certainly a spot where I can see dropping Justicar. This matchup isn't quite as strong right now as it would be, say, versus Hunter, where the armor earlier means a lot more for you. In this matchup, the armor definitely means something, but think about the 2 things that Priest is going to struggle with the most. Number 1, it's fighting a heavy board position. Number 2, specifically killing a 4-power minion. So Cairn here, certainly worth the drop, I think, just to start to fight back on board and be able to buy enough time so that if Laval wants to get back in the game, they have to extend. Brawl's waiting.
And that's entirely true. I think for myself as the Warrior player, I would be really scared in this position because while Bookworm has become very common in Dragon builds in general, turn 6 is also Entomb for Priest. And if an Entomb came down right now, that would mess up Clarkson's strategy in a number of ways. Number 1, we're reasonably certain they're running N'Zoth. Entomb takes away one of their N'Zoth threats. Number 2, they would be massively behind on board with very little ability to value that Brawl, which would have actually been really strong as a follow-up had they used it after losing Justicar to the Blackwing Corruptor.
That's a good point. Good point. God, I love debates. I love debates.
You can definitely see they're actively discussing every turn what the likely cards in play are. And if they thought there was an Entomb there, I do not think you would have seen them play Cairn. So they're appreciating that the likely turn 6 plays for Laval are Bookworms. Also, I love the Cro-Magus pick off that Nether Spite Historian.
I was waiting for you to say something about that. I was like, Cro-Magus. I actually missed what the other 2 were.
Alex Straza, and I do not remember what the other one was, but those 2 were the big ones.
Alex Straza is a tough one to pass up.
And Alex Straza is a
getting
big
the right damage for it. Clarkson gonna brawl right away. Oh, I don't know about this, Kevin. That's an aggressive brawl.
It is a very aggressive brawl, and Dragon Priest is a deck that does rely on minion damage, so you know there's going to be more minions coming down. There's lots of big minions in this deck. To see Ysera that soon, I mean, imagine if that had been after that Cro-Magus came into play. That could have been an incredible, incredible way. I mean, there's very little of anything that Clarkson would be able to do against 2 back-to-back Yseras. We've already seen 1 execute utilized by Clarkson. They don't have a lot of removal left. If they were willing to spend and execute on a Twilight Guardian, how are they supposed to answer Ysera?
I got to be honest. You're making a lot of sense right now. The executing the Twilight Guardian, I perhaps was a bit too early. Their hand was fairly weak at the time, so I can see where they're headed with it. You do have to do something about the early game.
What is
but we're starting to approach that point where Laval is just going to overwhelm Clarkson by having so many threats that Clarkson just doesn't have the removal spells in the deck to handle it.
And this is an awkward turn for them. It's a little bit clunky to not have anything to really develop here. if they play the Blackwing Corruptor, it doesn't do a whole lot. It just dies to the Bane Bloodhoof.
Wow.
Yeah, at this point,
Not
I can't
watching-
imagine a world in which Clarkson doesn't play Justicar.
I think I'd rather just have played Bookworm than use the hero power.
I think
Done
a
nothing.
Tempo Bookworm was probably a better choice.
Yeah, because now Clarkson's free to just get the Justicar on board. And sure, you can answer it with Blackwing Corruptor here, but you're in a very similar position to what you were last turn, where your opponent's kind of driving this initiative.
And you don't want a player where you know they have N'Zoth as their reset to be the player who gets to play ahead.
Right.
You really want them to be playing from behind as long as possible. And Clarkson does have a couple of ways to draw additional cards here, so they're in a position where they could fish, or they can decide to get Grom on the board. Grom a big risk because you're probably at least a little scared of that Shadow Word Death.
To me, Grom is very much a removal spell in this matchup. Now that being said, how important is the minion presence, and how important is the opportunity cost of the tank up here? There's a couple things they need to think about, and using that Grom now, maybe it forces something from Laval and they can take advantage of that, but I'm looking at that Bane. And I'm thinking to myself, if I just tack Bane into it, I can just keep waiting.
Not to mention, I mean, if they attack Bane in, until it takes damage, Grom is also a 4-power minion. And if I was going to do this as Clarkson, maybe I choose to trade in the Bane, which is a lower health minion and easier to remove for Laval, and keep my 4/9 minion that just can't be answered by Priest, because we are, at this point, reasonably confident they don't have it too.
There's a lot of things to think about that last turn.
And Laval now in a position where they also have to make some tough decisions, because they can't cleanly remove both of these minions. Best case scenario, they can Shadow Word Death Grom and, you know, play the Tempo Bookworm, or, you know, power out that Blackwing Corruptor, but it's not going to do a whole lot for them. So this is the turn we were looking for earlier, is just Bookworm to come down and contest the board.
I'm going to guess Clarkson doesn't want to draw cards this game.
It's starting to look that way.
Well, as soon as I say that, shield block.
I mean, it's tough, right? I mean, if they slam this Bookworm to clear it, they are going to start and draw a lot of cards, and they haven't actually got a really good board presence right now. They don't have a lot of removal. They've got to think very carefully, because Dragon Priest is one of those decks where once they've made it to the late game and they get to start sticking some aggressive threats to the board, that gets very difficult. And as the Warrior player, where you know you've expended an Execute, you know you've expended a Brawl, I cannot...
And now that is aggressive.
That is incredibly aggressive. That's a risk. That's a big risk to take as Clarkson here. They're basically saying, we're going to try to end this game before you can start and stick big threats to the board.
When you're playing as a warrior, as a control warrior build, you have 4 premium removal spells, 2 shield slams and 2 executes. Those oftentimes can just kill anything. In this spot, an execute is down on a Twilight Guardian. A shield slam is down on a Bookworm, and a Brawl has been used to clean up small minions. How on earth is this Ysera getting dealt with? And once it gets dealt with, how on earth is the Chromagus getting dealt with? And once that's dealt with, how on earth is the Ragnaros getting dealt with? Clarkson has used a lot of resources to get to this point, and Laval has baited all of those and is now punishing Clarkson.
And Clarkson has unfortunately also put themselves in a position where they have drawn a whole lot of cards. They are way closer to entering fatigue than Laval is. Laval can sit back and really just take their time and figure out how they're going to get the most possible value. They are already 2 full cards ahead, and with more draw in hand, I mean, you're to a point where this slam is a risk. Ever playing that Acolyte of Pain is a risk.
They're going to have to aggro him down.
Yeah, at this point, I mean, you have to think about racing. There's so little you can do.
That is something that Priest can fall to, is just strong aggression the full way. And they're going to expend everything and take care of this Ysera. But when this happens, Laval knows they are basically home free. There is no way to kill the next big threat in hand.
And they've got a variety of them to choose from. They can actually clear this board and have threats developed and still be able to follow up with their choice of Ragnaros or Chromagus. To say nothing of the fact that there is still the Netherspite Historian that could be drawing into even more late-game dragon threats.
I like all of Laval's plays here. Every single one of them is good.
Yeah, there's so many choices, and they all feel really good. I mean, the Blackwing Corruptor here doesn't get threatened by much of anything from Clarkson. Clarkson, I mean, just not in a really great spot.
At least not going to help much either. Cairn and Infested Tauren are the two death rattles at the moment. Not necessarily the greatest N'Zoth.
And they have to have more N'Zoth minions buried. I mean, there's got to be a Sylvanas in this deck yet, so they probably do actually want to cycle further before they play N'Zoth. Because once the big N'Zoth turn comes down, there isn't really anything Priest can do, right, against the big N'Zoth turn. A lot of minions hit all at once, and there's just not enough removal in Priest, in modern Priest, for there to be an answer to a board that powerful.
Not a bad one from the portal, but
it is a death rattle minion. That helps a lot.
Yeah, that was exactly where I was going with that. I'm a little bit behind on my words today, you know that? You keep hearing me have that hesitation.
Yeah, you're thinking
It's been a
doesn't quite come out.
18 on the road.
Yeah, no, it's
Having a blast, but whew, just a little bit slow today.
It's all good. That's definitely going to be an opportunity, at least. The Death Rattle minion does help them make the decision to start and push, because N'Zoth is going to be a bigger reload than before now.
Yeah, I mean they got to be there too. They've used so much at this point that if they try to play the grind battle, they are just going to lose, and they have recognized that at least. But piecing together an assault with this hand is tricky. It's not the easiest thing in the world. I mean, at times you are going to have to, if you go back and look at the game and wonder, should we have just played the N'Zoth? Was it enough? And I'm not saying it is, but when Clarkson, if and when Clarkson loses this game, there's a lot of questions, I think, for them to answer.
Right. They have to think very carefully about the risks they took by using so much premium removal on mid-game threats when they didn't have a board state that allowed them to actually push a lot of damage. I mean, they've never actually gotten to a position where they had any possible way to even threaten like a two-turn kill. So they've always been just kind of waiting to see what comes next.
And Laval they have no intentions of pushing Clarkson out of the game. It is a full grind battle for Laval. 9 damage was just invested into 2 1s and 1 1s.
We finally see that second shield slam, but I mean, if you're Clarkson, you now have to think very carefully about how you utilize that. N'Zoth isn't awful this turn, but it's going to feel like a risk to use that before you've seen Sylvanas. Elise just doesn't do enough. It doesn't contest this board in any meaningful fashion. And as much as Clarkson can obviously survive for several turns, there's 12 power on the board.
That'll add up quick.
It whittles you down faster than you'd think, that's for sure. And I don't think they're comfortable playing the Accolade of Pain. That's just going to push them too close to fatigue too quickly right now.
I mean, I look at the Accolade, I'm curious if they even got an option. Sylvanas has to be found before they can N'Zoth.
Absolutely.
Is the conclusion I think they've drawn.
Right, so they're left in this position of, do we Elise and give it away just to have a little less incoming face damage and try to maximize the number of turns we survive with this tank up? Are we prepared to risk playing the second shield slam onto a 5 power minion?
Uh-oh.
They eyeball that N'Zoth.
All the plays look like to me.
it's almost top to bottom.
N'Zoth it is. They've said this has got to be enough to get the job done.
And that is a lot of threats. And remember, Laval doesn't have a way to answer this. Like, their hand is good, but they don't actually have a way to answer this many minions on the board. They have all these really awesome looking plays, right? Chromagus into Power Word Shield. You can dream and push the Cairn back into the hand, but that doesn't win them the game. That just buys them a turn. They don't actually have a lot of removal. And Dream on Cairn is probably one of the most efficient things they can do here.
Yeah, I mean, that's the beginning of the end. I feel like for Laval, is you see the Cairn go. Like, Cairn was the pressure they were kind of relying on to really get this job done. The fact that they will now be in a position where Laval can isolate the N'Zoth alone, or just go ahead and entomb the N'Zoth and not really worry too much about it.
And they've been playing all game as if there was no Entomb in play, so that's an incredibly scary prospect. Does Entomb pull anything of consequence for Laval?
Not currently. There's been no death rattles from Laval's deck.
Even still, I mean, if there's even a Chilmaw, whether that's in the deck or comes off that Nethersight story, and that becomes a very, very significant problem for Clarkson in the late game. Best case scenario at this point, they maybe have a second Brawl.
Yeah, I mean, this is a downhill spiral, I think, for Clarkson at this point. There's just so much in Laval's hand. And even though it looks like their deck is designed to be the aggressor, they are very much the ones in the control seat right now.
What now?
Yeah, all the armor in the world isn't going to protect them from the sheer number of major threats that Laval's just going to keep putting down on a turn-to-turn basis.
Shadow Word Pain not going to be any use this turn.
Do you just throw down one of Chromagus or Ragnaros and start letting those cards do some work?
Well, I'm curious if they read the hand range as right now. You know, I'm thinking that Brawl is definitely on the radar, but Acolyte of Pain has got to be a thought of card that could be in your opponent's hand. They've drawn so much and they've used so much that there's not really an opportunity to play a card like that. And so the Ragnaros here, if Brawl is in Clarkson's hand and it nails the first half of Cairn, there's still a minion on board for Clarkson. So if they Brawl, oftentimes they Brawl away their own minion. And those are kind of the worst situation Brawls is when you're killing your own minions.
And now that they've seen the second Shield Slam, they know the only premium removal left is potentially the second Execute, which will basically have to be used on that Chromagus. There's never going to be enough power on the board to clear Chromagus otherwise.
Clarkson looking at ways to trade here. But
What
with how far
now?
behind they are in the inevitable fatigue race, if they choose to go that defensive route, I'm not sure they make up that difference by fighting for board.
I mean, playing the Revenge is probably fine because there's not a lot of small minions that they're going to be able to clear with it down the road. If they get to a point where Revenge is activated, they've already lost.
Yeah, still a fear of playing Elise, and I think that Entomb has certainly been on their mind because of that. They seem really hesitant to play it, but they've seen an Entomb and it's Dragon Priest. I am not putting them onto Entombs personally.
This has been a very top-heavy Dragon Priest, though. I mean, you saw multiple Bookworms, you saw Ysera in the deck by default, as well as Ragnaros.
Do you have the artifact?
Yeah, I like playing it.
And it's time. At this point, if it gets picked up, they were already in a very bad position, and oh my goodness.
What's kind of interesting about this is they actually have two reasonable Entomb targets. Number one is the Cairn because they stole
the N'Zoth.
And the fact that it's just Cairn in general. Number two is the Elise to even further buy your inevitability. But they are concerned with taking care of the board position right now, and so no Entomb's even going to be used. Looks like they're just holding on to it, which I definitely don't mind this. This is a strong use of resources.
It's interesting, though. I mean, the question becomes, are they under enough pressure that they want to not develop the Chromagus or the Twilight Guardian? Holding Entomb is going to feel really good, but they definitely had room there, I think, to think about one of the larger threats in their hand.
Are upon us.
I feel like Clarkson's own deck size is the threat right now.
They're so low on cards, and the cards they have don't do anything for them.
Yeah, and I think that's what Laval has identified here. They're free to take this one slow and just win the long game.
It's very difficult to win this matchup against the Priest if you don't have a way to answer each threat as it comes down. And Laval just has too many threats left, given the way that Clarkson has valued their removal. I would love to see this Chromagus come down. I mean, that card has been in that hand for so long, and that could be so powerful. If they had just drawn into double N'Zoth because Chromagus was on the board, we would have the strangest game on our hands right now.
I'm in agreement with you. I like the Chromagus here. You've seen two Shield Slams, you've seen an Execute, you've seen a Brawl. 33% of the time it lives through the Brawl. For Execute to happen, they have to have an Execute Activator. They just say, you know what? 5-7 is good enough.
That's insane, and I love it. This is such a great game for Laval. They're just in the driver's seat. Sylvanas is way too little, way too late for Clarkson.
Yeah, the deck size tells everything. Just the number of cards they had to draw to answer the Ysera. They used double slam.
I have no time for games.
Too much cycle, too much removal expended on that single minion, and the single turn immediately following the use of a shield slam that they should have been valuing as their late game removal. Laval hesitant here to play into the brawl. They don't want to develop any additional board. They don't even want to draw cards with this Northshire
Oh,
card.
absolutely not. At this point, it is death by dragon scratches.
Those scratchy dragons.
You would think it would take this long.
I mean, yeah, you would think, right? Like the dragons should just be maybe a little bit bigger, a little bit scarier. Cromagus needs to come down and show them how dragon scratches work.
Survivalist Gramash. He's got like 6 months of MREs and
Oh, the double Netherspite Historian. This is second Cromagus.
Yes,
Deathwing.
please.
I think the Cromagus is the correct pick there. And
how about a
third
third one?
Cromagus?
Yeah.
Can we get a third Cromagus? Laval, do it. their reaction they have, just priceless. They're now thinking, I think, about the Alexstrasza maybe as a way just to sort of start and move the game a little bit faster. Yeah, that is going to be the choice.
Aw.
That's too bad. Triple Cromagus would have been more
How
fun.
could there be 3 Chromaguses in the world? Just doesn't even make sense.
Breaks all the rules. The second Execute finally shows up. They honestly can't afford to play it here. What could possibly be left in Clarkson's deck? They must have another Brawl. What else are they hoping to roll into here that makes the difference?
Not sure, honestly. I mean, they definitely have a second Brawl in the build. But even when the Brawl comes out, even if they blow up the Zoth and the Chromagus, deck size is telling. They do have the Golden Monkey. Golden Monkey can change things. But
Well,
that's a lot of shenanigans.
It's a lot of shenanigans, and they're gonna clear Chromagus the first, and then probably be rather upset when Chromagus the second comes out to play.
Magazington, the second of Haven, Brookshire.
I mean, if you're Laval here, you've just got so many unbelievable choices. You now know the second Execute is gone. All you're playing around is that second Brawl. You've got so many threats to develop that it honestly doesn't matter. You're worried maybe a little about fatigue, and Alexstrasza does help to sort of modify that math slightly, but I'm pretty sure that Laval has this game stitched up.
Yeah. Once upon a time, Alexstrasza shred armor. Thankfully, no longer.
Yeah, it's not something she's got in her list of tricks anymore.
Yeah, if your opponent had 100,000 armor, you're at 15, go. What a great card that was.
Oh, and the worst outcome possible on the Brawl. Not that it much mattered. I mean, Clarkson going to choose to take it out of play with this bash, but they just can't develop any threats of their own, and whatever Laval sticks down this next turn, I think, tells them what they need to know. Chromagus, second of his name.
It's just funny.
I just love it. I mean, Chromagus is already one of my favorite dragons, just such a fun card. And now, I mean, if they choose to use the Azure Drake next turn, or whatever, I mean, they don't have to, they don't need to duplicate cards, but they've got so many options, and they're winning the war of attrition very, very quickly here.
Are you mocking me?
Yeah, it's been won. Bravo to Laval. They have Clarkson's number where the endgame is concerned. And notice that the pace of play has greatly sped up at this point. They have identified everything left. They know exactly what Clarkson's last few cards are. They know that there's no way to deal with Chromagus. It is actually a matter of time.
Yeah, I don't think anything that come out of this monkey can even really...
Can they get like infinite Elises from the monkey? Is that like a possibility? Like if you just keep getting Elises and Golden Monkeys into Elise over and over again, can you extend your deck indefinitely?
I think you maybe technically could if you rolled Elise every single time, yeah.
Eventually you run out of Elises, but you gotta get where I'm going.
Yeah, it's
It's gotta be a legendary that puts cards in your hand. Mukla Tyrant.
Yeah, Mukla would do it, technically. But yeah, this is crazy.
We have found an infinite loop.
I have no time for games.
It's probably something coded to prevent that. But yeah, I think Clarkson here just admitting that this is over and ready to move on and go to game number 4.
Hey. That'll speed the process up.
Yeah, that's definitely not the card they wanted because they're never giving away Tank Up, ever.
Take that, Wormrust Agent. 2-1 lead for Laval. I'll tell you what, I don't want to play an endgame versus him.
No, that was a pretty awesome late game, and I think it's interesting. You know, Clarkson did really go all in on these sort of late game control styles with 2 back-to-back N'Zoth decks, but I don't know if they're actually feeling very good about that choice right now.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it, I think, just boiled down to that early game. Like you mentioned, expending the premium removal spells the way they did, I think, set them way far back in it. And they're relying so much on the N'Zoth to get the job done that they're forgetting about the overall game plan, which is you still need to answer some of your opponent's threats. Like, being able to have an inevitability engine doesn't necessarily mean that you have a way to drive it there. Like, you need the wheels, you need the axles, you need the body of the vehicle. The shield slams and the executes are part of that.
Right, and they did really choose to play those quite early, thinking they could be the aggressor, get in a position where they could start and deal some damage, but they didn't necessarily have the tools to get out as soon as Entomb came into play. And Entomb came into play quite late, but I think as soon as that first one came down, they had to know that they were always going to be playing from behind.
Yep, indeed they were. And now they've got to figure something out, because Laval knows what now 2 of the endgame builds. Or I'm sorry, they know what the other endgame build is. They got a lot of information that game. If they have any idea about how to navigate the Dragon Warrior versus that matchup, they're going to be in good shape, because this isn't a Dragon Warrior. This is a control Dragon Warrior.
Right, and now Clarkson is going to choose to go to their final deck, which is this I presume Tempo Mage, judging by the cards we were seeing in front of us. Not a Freeze Mage with the Azure Drake and the Arcane Missiles. So we're going to have to see if they can get... I mean, this is a matchup that could be really good for Clarkson, but they need to get a lot of really, really good early game plays. Tempo Mage heavily reliant on a strong early game.
Yeah, a lot of times, definitely. Now, versus Control Dragon Warrior, I think they are going to push the issue, but there's an Archmage Antonidas, and that is a tech choice that Dr. Hippie piloted to the finals of the World Championships, where his game plan is to just make a few fireballs and have a strong endgame push. Versus what Laval has in this Warrior deck, that is probably the strongest tech option they could have had for a Mage build.
Yeah, it does set them up for possibly the best in-game outcome. And if Laval isn't able to do a lot to threaten Clarkson in the early game, they're going to be able to hang on to a lot of those cheap spells and utilize them as activators for Antonidas.
It starts with a little babbling book. So you can see that Clarkson already has that long-term plan in mind. If they're sending out Cult Sorcerer or Sorcerer's Apprentice here, those are just, oftentimes you're feeding it to Fiery Gorax. And so in this spot, they want to find better uses for those 2 cards.
And against a warrior, you also maybe run the risk that there's going to be other early game minions. If they don't know that it's a Dragon Warrior at this point, but when they find that out...
no, they played it game 1.
Oh, they did play it. So
yeah,
they already know. They could be worried about Alex Justice Champion. Maybe they could be worried about a lot of... Fairy Dragon could be a huge threat to a Tempo Mage in the early game.
There's a lot of answers in Warrior for the early game spells. Now, Tempo Mages sometimes have to go that direction when they don't have the endgame plan already, but the Antonidas already being in Clarkson's hand, they know that they can take it slow because Laval's Dragon Warrior deck is not pressuring quite the same as the rest of them. Sure, they can still get those draws, but there's no Kor'kron Elites in here. It's not like you're not trying to just kill them. They're trying to stabilize the board position and have just massive mid-range threats.
Right, and Laval does have a really nice mid-game Bookworm, actually surprisingly very, very effective in this matchup. So there's lots of targets for it. They've got a really, really solid set of curve turns coming up here. And Clarkson, for better or for worse, really just doesn't have a lot of development available to them. They really do want to hold on to spells. That Frost Nova off the Babbling Book is actually very interesting because that's a huge pickup against such a minion-centric build. But they do need to start and push some damage to actually offset the armor gain Laval is going to get every turn.
I'm going with the Cult Sorcerer here, not coupling it with Arcane Blast, so they'll have to find a different use of the spell power here. But we see the information that they're looking for, which is Laval is capable of holding Fiery Gorax in hand and foregoing that development in favor of tank up. So now, if they can find another situation where Laval can be conservative in a spot, Clarkson may still be able to make a read that a card is in hand.
It's going to be very difficult too because they do really want to value holding onto these spells. As tempting as it might be to start, use the Frost Bolt to stop weapon damage, they really do have a much better chance of surviving if they can combo those together with any number of the possible outcomes in Tempo Mage, whether that's the Sorcerer's Apprentice, the Antonidas, down the road a Flame Waker. There are lots of ways that they can make this very, very effective.
Very aggressive attack from the second Fiery Gorax. charge on a babbling book.
Seems like it was a very expensive way to utilize that single charge.
Someday I'll be just like you.
I mean, I'm right there with you. I felt
Unnecessary.
Yeah.
Unnecessary
Yeah,
is the word for it, yeah. I don't know. Clarkson feels like they're really trying to slow roll this, and in Tempo Mage, that feels risky to me. I feel like they're going to continue to just sort of play into the big mid-game turns that Laval has available to them in this Dragon Warrior. Babbling Book number 2 provides them with a Forgotten Torch. That's an enormous pickup right now.
not only the fact that it's killing this Blackwing Corruptor, but the fact that it's adding Forgotten Torch to the build.
Yeah, Roaring Torch down the road is going to be great.
I'm sorry, yeah, Roaring Torch.
Yeah, phenomenal either in tandem with, Antonidas, or just because it's a lot of extra burn for the late game.
What to do?
I mean, if they naturally have Forgotten Torch in here as well, I mean, that's something else to consider.
It's a lot of depth into the deck, and they're getting very close to the core turns here for the Antonidas. They'd be able next turn to Antonidas coin out a spell. This is something that I think is going to be really scary for Laval when it hits. And Dragon Warrior doesn't, as we saw, necessarily have the big removal necessary to actually answer Antonidas at all.
Oh, you're right. Shield Slam was the only actual straight-up removal spell.
It's going to be very difficult for them because they don't run premium removal. There's no brawls, and Clarkson knows that because they've seen this deck pretty well all the way top to bottom.
That's a really good point to make. I forgot about that.
I don't know what that does to Clarkson's decision making this turn, but they do have some very, very nice opportunities coming up here to take advantage of the spell synergy. Next turn, if they decide to generate 3 fireballs from Antonidas, that could be game-ending.
Yeah, I think that's what they're looking at as well, is that exact spot. Now, if they continue to wait, if there's not a lot from Laval to keep fighting against this, they may be able to wait a little bit longer. So the question is, how greedy do they or should they get in that situation? Seeing the Frost Nova happen, that is certainly something I'm concerned with, because Flamewaker is very much the same vein that the Antonidas is, where the more you can do with it, the better it is. So when they use that Frost Nova, they forego the ability to have an Archmage Sorcerer's Apprentice coin Frost Nova, chain off the rest of the spells, try to protect the Antonidas plan, and instead are going to have to settle for a little bit less. Now, the question from Antonidas is, how much is enough? You don't need to do everything, you just need to do enough.
And they could have delayed this turn to also value the Frostbolt in tandem with this whole combination as well. But I think they're just looking at this and saying, you know what? 3 fireballs is pretty good, and if we can ask them to spend all of their board presence on answering Antonidas, that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, Tony's definitely getting answered here. There's no question about it.
That's a lot of damage, though. I mean, now Clarkson is sitting on just a ton of throughput, and Laval has to be very, very cognizant of just how significant that threat will be.
And I wonder if this is enough fireballs. I really do. I mean, I'm starting to look at the hand and look at the list that I'd written down from game 1. There's a lot of gas in the end game. There's 2 Bookworms. There's Elise, Sylvanas, Barongeddon.
Well, and just the way they played this turn, right? Using Bash and Shield Slam as the way to clear Antonidas tells you that they're going to try really hard to protect their life total now. They're going to use whatever they can to stay afloat here. I mean, these are all scary options. I'm actually super thrilled they took that Onyxia, because that's tough for a Tempo Mage to answer.
It's just a lot of stuff. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of fireballs, but can Clarkson ever close? And none of the targets on board are particularly strong for fireball right now.
I mean, if they spend the Flamewaker, the Frostbolt, the Roaring Torch, and just hope to get lucky on Flamewaker attacks, that's an expensive proposition. And if this doesn't play out the way they want it to, oh wow, okay, that's you can't ask for. This Flamewaker also goes to college, and he was well trained.
And Clarkson going to start launching fireballs at the dome. I don't know about this one, Kevin. I think Fatigue may be setting in on Clark, because they they have just kind of gotten grounded out of the game. I mean, they have 18, 19 damage available, 20 damage over 2 turns. Laval's at 28, and they're going to 30, and they're going to 32. So they still need 12 more damage in the next 2 turns to close. And that continues to grow turn after turn.
And we've seen most of the core synergy already pass through. Antonidas is gone, both Flame Wakers are gone, a Sorcerer's Apprentice is gone. It's actually going to be very difficult now because Clarkson basically on a turn-to-turn basis right now, you can see they're going to likely utilize the hero power to take care of a low health minion. But if they spend any of this damage on removal, there's just no way for them to close. You're right, there's no win condition left to play towards. Their late game, I mean, even if they've got a Tempo Mage variant here that includes some top end like a Ragnaros, they may very well just not have enough answers. And if they're running big, expensive late game like Ragnaros or Firelands Portal, I don't know where they can go.
The Ball's Tome's a start, and that's not a follow-up.
Those are not the cards they were hoping for. Now, Mirror Entity could be interesting because it does give them a decent minion pretty much no matter what. Most of the cheap stuff has come out from Laval already, so they're not going to get a Netherspike Historian off of this. They're going to get an okay body, but they're also just going to probably get you know, chipped away at too fast for them to really be able to do anything in response.
Yeah, Laval got to take some time on this one.
They've tested Vaporize and Ice Barrier. This will tell them that it's Mirror Entity.
You know, pre-nerf BGH. This would have been a great. This would have been a great turn.
Yeah, set up again and then take it away. Honestly, though, I mean, Clarkson, they're going to be looking at their hand right now, evaluating the push potential and saying if they don't draw into Arcane Intellect or some other way to really activate additional damage, this game is looking very, very scary right now. So top heavy with the Firelands Portal, that does give them a little bit of room to play. They can clear this Blackwing Corruptor. Minion outcome here could be very significant.
Ooh.
That's actually a nice pickup here because they can get the Inspire effect and then play the Mirror Image to protect it. Anytime
Something like that can just generate constantly hits the board, it's always something to think about. You always got to stop for a moment and look and wonder, is this ever enough to get there?
I mean, it's so scary because that's still just not going to be a lot of damage. And we also can see on the other side that sooner or later, Baron Gen's going to take care of all of the Squires. So it's not going to be the answer they need. I don't think this actually buys them back into the game, but it does mean Laval has to reevaluate their strategy a little bit.
I mean, that Recruiter's not dying this turn.
Not unless Laval decides to do something crazy like Brawl It, or they draw into something with that Azure Drake. And either way, those are potentially challenging turns that don't really give Laval the advancement towards their own win condition that they're looking for. Yeah, I don't know.
Telling you, Inspire stuff like this, everyone knows that Inspire was like not the strongest mechanic. The problem with it is there are times when Inspire can take over a game. And so Laval recognizes this, and they go, better get some big threats out then.
And this asks a question that Clarkson simply can't answer. I mean, they have to expend enormous resources to remove Onyxia alone. The Whelps are going to survive. I mean, there's going to be power on the board, even if they choose to utilize multiple spells and the Recruiter itself to clear the Twilight Guardian and Onyxia. They're still taking a lot of damage. They're still not putting themselves in a position to end the game, and they're exhausting all of their burn, all of their ways to actually win the game on simply getting minions off the board when there are more big minions coming for Laval.
And they're trying to find a way out of this, but it definitely involves just using your burn spells. Onyxia is got to die.
Right, you can't leave that up at all. I mean, I think Laval is going to be rewarded here for their smart use of a lot of really good mid-game synergy. I think this is you know, Laval's game to lose.
Well, if you're Laval, you're certainly feeling in comfortable shape after this sequence.
Ready, sir.
Ready, sir.
I don't think you're ready, sir. I mean, regardless of what that secret is, Laval is in really good shape here. They're going to be able to see right away.
Checking for effigy first.
Yeah, not an effigy. They'll know with the final whelp that it's not Ice Barrier or Vaporize. They can throw down pretty much anything, even Brand, just to check for the mirror entity if they're worried about it.
You know, this is actually kind of clever. The way that Clarkson played this, they really represented a strong range of secrets. And so Laval checked for effigy first. So no, it's not that. This whelp is going into the 5-1 because it's just, that's the only trade, and that's the strongest way for them to do it. And then with the Onyxia isolated, are they willing to risk whether or not this is vaporized or not?
I mean, I'm not sure.
It's
I
actually
think
kind of funny. They
it's
delayed
clever.
the Onyxia from attacking a lot of times here. And so for Laval, if they really wanted to play around that, it's push one to the face, and then use the Onyxia, follow up with Baron again. That cleans up the 5-1. In this instance, they're just going to draw a couple of extra cards, it looks like.
If this whelp goes face, though, they will know that it's not Vaporize, not Ice Barrier. The world's most expensive shield slam will kill a 1/3 Spellbender.
The sound of that crashing for 8 is just so satisfying.
Very satisfying, and tells Clarkson that this game has pretty much come to a conclusion. It's all over but the shouting here, as they're going to have to expend everything they've got left just to get back on the board. And frankly, Laval can play the Twilight Guardian next turn and scare them into into the natural conclusion of this game.
Yeah, they've kind of got everything they need. This is not the best for Clarkson at this point. They have a fireball left over, but Tech Guy's not ready either.
I think that Antonidas, had it come down one turn later, could have been a very different outcome. But at this point, Laval just says, you don't have enough ways left to answer this. And that's a lot of fireballs, but it doesn't matter. This is just not going to do the work that Clarkson needs it to. They can't throw this other fireball into the face because they now have to treat it as removal. And what are they playing to? What is left in this deck that could
Maybe there's a Yogg.
possibly... There could be a Yogg. There could be a Yogg.
Welcome to the Grand Tournament, champions.
They're not quitting, that's for sure. Honestly, if they could manage to answer everything, they can still win this game. I mean, Clarkson's way ahead on the fatigue race, but they have a long way to go to stabilize that point.
I was really hoping for that to be the world's tiniest Ragnaros, because that would have been a way for them to get back in this game. Like that tiny new Ragnaros that's coming to Heroes of the Storm.
Oh yeah,
Little baby Ragnaros.
that's gonna bring me back. It's gonna bring me back to Hots.
Wow.
The third Chromagus?
That's the Chromagus we were waiting for before.
Third
Yeah,
Chromagus.
they're going to go Nefarian, but never not Chromagus, guys. Never not Chromagus. Too much fun can be had with Chromagus shenanigans. Mana Worm's simply not going to be the card they need here, and I think Clarkson is going to do what they can, but ultimately they're ready to throw in the towel here.
Fire not quite lethal, but Nefarian is basically lethal. Hey!
Wow. Well, they can go for style
They're
points.
going for it too!
That Arcane Elect, way too little, way too late. I think Laval knows. There was a Ragnaros, so they could have been hitting that Ragnaros either earlier on or with the Barns. And that could have actually been significant. So they did have a bit of top end. They did have some ways out. But all of the draw in the deck just buried at the bottom.
You win this.
And that's it. That means Laval going to take the series 3-1 after some very, very challenging games, piloting some unique and interesting decks.
Yeah, lots of late game plans that are going in here, and they were in the driver's seat what felt like the entire time.
Yeah, Laval really rewarded for playing a lot of powerful mid-game, really knowing how to pilot their decks. And very challenging, I think, for Clarkson to do what they were doing there, really relying on a lot of late game, a lot of big resets that, I mean, there's a lot of risk inherent in relying on closing out the game so close to fatigue or in fatigue.
Yeah, and so far, that's what we've seen from them in the past. You know, if you look at their past week's decks, it was N'Zoth Hunter, Aggro Paladin, Reno Rogue, and Midrange Shaman. This week, no disappointment, of course. The Aggro Hunter, Dragon Priest, a control Dragon Warrior, and I'm curious what would have been their Shaman build. It says mid-range Shaman, but
mid-range Shaman means a lot of things to a lot of people,
especially in this matchup. So let us know what you guys thought about that one. It was a long, grueling one, but would you have taken third Chromagus? What about the fourth one? Let us know. You can visit us on Facebook, or you can tweet at Team Tespa. If you're looking to compete in some of the upcoming Tespa chapters, a lot of scholarships have been given away over the course of the past year with Heroes of the Dorm, with the Hearthstone event at PAX South. There's opportunities to play coming up, so visit tespa.org for more information. First match in the books with 3. Oh, yeah, we also want to take this time to thank the sponsors. Excuse me. We're powered by Twitch here at the studios in Burbank, but also thanks to Gunner and Steel Series for helping contribute to the scholarships for these young players. So first match in the books with Laval taking it 3-1, but we got 2 more matches for you coming up. The next one is going to be Duke University taking on the University of Texas Dallas. Don't go anywhere, guys. 2 more matches today, right after this.